I'm Craig DeRoche, CEO of Family Policy Alliance. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Covey, Director of Policy at Texas Values. Jonathan and his team were deeply involved in securing a legal victory in the Texas legislature when the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals vacated a federal injunction against Senate Bill 12, a law designed to protect children from what the organization calls hypersexualized performances. I think that is being diplomatic. And this was going on in the presence of minors. The battle to protect children from drag shows, folks. That's what we're talking about. It's one of the many facing our friends at Texas Values. Jonathan has worked for a member of Congress. He's worked for the Texas in the Capitol, various capacities, and he is a senior policy analyst for a state senator. Now his expertise comes to work for us in our mission, the mission that you all support. Jonathan, thanks for being on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, great to be here, Craig. Thanks for having me.
When the Texas legislature goes and does something common sense to this, and it turns out it's a hornet's nest, what motivated the Texas legislature and Texas Values to pursue Senate Bill 12 in the first place before you even maybe knew it was this big hornet's nest?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what motivated us back in 2023 was the same motivation that we have now, which is sexualized performances like drag shows being performed in venues that are accessible to children and featuring sexually explicit nudity and activities for children, and it actually harms children. One of the things that we commonly heard in Texas was when a drag queen in Plano, Texas, lifted a skirt, gyrating in front of kids, lip syncing sexually explicit songs and materials. So this is happening all over Texas, and it happened in Arlington. It happens on a fairly substantial scale. And Texas was back in 23 was one of over actually a dozen states that was considering banning this type of activity. But in Texas, we decided we had the political willpower to do something about it. So we passed what's called Senate Bill 12, which basically says that if you're engaged in this, then you can be hit with a Class A misdemeanor. And if you're someone who controls sort of a property or a commercial enterprise that's allowing this, that's also a civil penalty under a separate clause. So this is a very important thing that happened back in 23, and we continue to believe in it.
So the drag show performers. Now, this is my editorial. I have 3 daughters, and I'm married to my beautiful wife now for 27 years. That is not honoring women as a gender. That is trying to seek to mock and humiliate women as a gender, the same as people would say they're going to have a blackface show. We see a lot of Democrats running for office, for governor, they get elected, and then we find out they mock Black people. They put like shoe polish on their face to try to humiliate Black people. This is the same tradition from the left in America. They were the Nazis. They were back in the 1930s, they were the segregationists, the KKK people. And they would say, we have the right to go in your park. We're the KKK. We're the communists. That happened in America too, in the 40s and 50s. We're going to come in your park. Now we have the drag show people filling that gap because I guess the communists are getting elected mayor now. Why do they think it's free speech to go after women first? And then the next question, so you don't bring the two in, is what if it's kids in the audience? So what about is this free speech when it's the public? Is that one of the things that you talked about? And then we're going to get to the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of groups try to frame the issue as sort of a broad attack on adults. And you're right. In reality, a lot of these laws are actually quite narrow, only banning these types of performances where children are involved and where they're sexually explicit in nature. But they want to blur the lines. They want to make it seem like it's First Amendment free expression under the idea that this is art or this is free expression or of some sort. But thankfully, most parents, regardless of their politics, regardless of what they think, tend to agree with us that children should not be exposed to these types of sexualized performances.
They passed this law. It's law in Texas. And then big time lawyers get involved and they go to a federal judge. This is why I want to pause and ask yourself this, Jonathan. You and I know the answer, but you're cutting off a supply to people of something that they want so desperately bad, they're willing to go to the federal United States. So here in America, we can't get parts for our cars. We can't get pharmaceuticals for our kids, our cancer patients, and the rest of the stuff. But this judge said, now, hold on a second. In 2023, we can't stop the supply of these kids and these other people that are being recruited into this lifestyle. And he actually super judicially said, you can't even enforce a Texas law. Is that what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. The lower court said you can't enforce this law. That happened back in 23 after this law came out. And you're right. I mean, the studies show hypersexualization, has mental health issues, anxiety, depression, self-esteem issues. It normalizes risky behavior. It contributes to confusion, to shame, to guilt, all this sorts of stuff. And we actually, these are terrible things. They have terrible consequences. We actually wrote an amicus brief in this case talking about how it is well established in the law that government has a legitimate interest in the welfare of children. Because the truth is, when you're talking about the legal definition of obscenity, the law treats kids differently than it treats adults. What is obscene to children may not be obscene to adults. And the pattern of these shows that they're trying to really intentionally lure kids into exposure. And that makes a big difference under the law.
Where are they trying to have these shows?
Yeah, I mean, really anywhere, but we've seen them, of course, in public places where kids are. We've seen them in kids' theme parks. We've seen them in commercial establishments, really anywhere where kids are available and to go into. And so it's not just in one obscure place, it's all over.
So, folks, and if you're an employer and you're listening to this, you should really think through what you're allowing to happen on your grounds. This is not free speech. I'm going to give you, again, one of my opinions, but I'm not a lawyer, so I have more room than you do. Who's the officer of the court? Jonathan Covey, director of policy with Texas Values, one of the great legal minds, one of the great organizations in our movement right now, folks. You want to know who Texas Values are? They're the organization when everybody said heartbeat legislation will not protect the lives of the unborn. They brought that all the way to the Supreme Court before Dobbs. That's who we're talking to right now. I love Texas Values. You're always out there innovating. And here you are again, and you're talking about what this is for and what these people are doing. It's very uncomfortable. But for about 50 years, we had the rising generation when they were teenagers, the baby boomers, and they've been running our country since 1992. And they said this is all harmless. It's just the adults that are going to look at it. It's just like Hugh Hefner's Playboys. It's far more nefarious than that. And we're finding in study after study, and we're seeing in case after case, there's some really bad actors. And this is really fueling a lot of the sex trafficking. And that's why Senate Bill 12 is so important that we litigate these things, folks. And here's why. And then I want you to give me your opinion, Jonathan. But when the KKK and the Nazis would go into the park of the city and get a permit to do their thing, they'd be talking about the idea of Nazism. They'd be talking about the idea of communism. You know what I mean? The idea of racism. Here, these people are actually trying to practice bigotry, trying to practice hate, trying to practice the deplorable, just wretched aspects of their ideology. And that's one of the things that I don't think the public has recognized yet, that all those other people fit in with the societal norms while they raise their brand that they were trying to advertise into their lifestyle. These folks are actually trying to come straight at our kids. And that's why Senate Bill 12 is so important to pass. So with all that said, are there other states, like what's our hope? Or actually with Texas, you haven't even had a chance to do Senate Bill 12 yet, have you?
No, actually, you're right. It's been vacated. The decision from the lower court was vacated, which means it was undone, and it's going back to a lower court to be relitigated. So we haven't even had a chance to get through the merits of the argument. And you were talking about the First Amendment. What it really goes back to is that standard that I mentioned earlier, the Moody standard. The Fifth Circuit emphasized that even though there is some expressive conduct that's protected, there's room for states to regulate these types of performances, especially when minors are involved. There's that, it's that very special 18-year-old dividing line right there, right? Because by remanding, going back under the Moody standard, I think what the court is kind of signaling is there are numerous applications that these laws can have that are constitutional, and what the uses will be kind of depend on context. We like to say it's a fact intensive inquiry, but we'll see.
Okay, I know maybe, Jonathan, my opinion of why they came so aggressively at you. See, if you can go through your life, if I could have went through my life, folks, people know my story. I tried to solve my problems with alcohol. You'd say, well, what are your problems? Part of it was a sexualization when I was a kid, right? This stuff is a deep moral cut into people, and how they try to solve it can either lead them toward health or lead them further away from health and further toward depravity. And if you allow a kid to grow up to 18 without being sexualized, they got a really good chance at a healthy sex life. But if you can interrupt that, if you can persuade them into one of these sexual lifestyles that lead to slavery for the rest of your life, when they're a kid, you can lock them in then. And that, I believe, Jonathan, is why they're so focused on the kids versus saying this is free speech for all the culture. Is everybody over 18 says that's a bunch of nonsense and they won't go to the show. They're trying to force this into our K-12 schools so they can recruit kids who haven't formed an opinion on it yet. That's my opinion, and it's driving me nuts.
I 100% agree with you. I think it sets up what was basically a financial funnel, right? You mentioned human trafficking before. Huge money in human trafficking for those who do it illegally, of course, and then huge money in gender transition surgeries and treatments as well. So what this does is this hypersexualization sets up the mental health issues. It sets up the risky behavior issues, the shame and the guilt that sort of funnels kids into those industries for the money. And it's really terrible, and the consequences are terrible for kids.
Think about it, folks. On a lot of our issues, people have a hard time finding their voice, Jonathan. You know that. And folks, I respect that. It's an uncomfortable time for us to raise our voice. But I will tell you where the most unanimity exists. Jonathan, I'll let you answer for where you see it, is around protecting our kids from sexualization and pornography. Folks, the Democrat voters, primary Democrat voters, have almost no difference of Republican primary voters on how angered they are that this still exists in our country on our kids' cell phones. Jonathan, what I've been saying is I want it to be as easy for a teenage kid to buy a gun or a human slave as it is for them to be able to see pornography. And I mean that because you know what? Mark Zuckerberg and Google and all the rest of them, I can't buy a gun. I can't get a human slave. They've done a good job on that. eBay, everybody. And I think they're lying, Jonathan, that they can't keep pornography off the internet. I think it's what fuels their advertising. And I think that there hasn't been accountability. And it's always the kids. This is why I'm bringing this up. It's always the kids that pay the price, because the people that get to 18 without this stuff in front of them, they do okay. So what can we be doing in our movement? Tell people how our movement's different, how we come up with like a Senate Bill 12, and then how that spreads through our country. And then what our hope is, if let's say this becomes popular in many states, what do we do with it then?
Yeah, so I totally agree. And what I would say to your first point is, of course, that yes, I think it's a bipartisan issue. Parents, they can't agree more on this issue to say we don't want our kids hyper sexualized. We don't want them exposed to this type of performance, these type of materials, and it's across the nation. It's not even something that you find just in conservative states or conservative regions, but it's across the nation. And what can we do? I think that we can continue to put forth good legislation in our state legislatures. We have the blessing of being able to litigate this not just in one forum, but in 50 forums across the state to talk about these issues in each one of our states, to bring good legislation, to encourage our legislators to do those things, and of course to make sure that those folks who appoint judges put the judges in place that are going to actually look at the constitutional analysis and realize that the government has this legitimate interest in protecting the welfare of kids. So there are so many things that we can do, but I think the most important thing as a parent is to guard our own children, to be careful for our own family and our own flock. But beyond that, getting involved is certainly, government belongs to those who show up. And so, we want to make sure that we show up for these issues.
And that is why we're having this discussion with Mr. Jonathan Covey, the policy director for Texas Values, one of the biggest and most impactful family policy councils in the country. Folks, we're talking about some pretty dark stuff here. We're talking about the need to pass legislation to protect our kids from hypersexualization, from essentially grooming and recruiting, which is far different from free speech. And we have to talk about that because the evil one, and through the proxies, the media, the people that are falling for these tricks, are saying words out there that are confusing people. This is not free speech, folks. It was never allowed in our country to yell fire in a movie theater. That's what our Supreme Court said. That's not free speech. That is bullying your neighbors. That can lead to injuries, unsafe, all sorts of other stuff. Well, guess what? It happens when you're doing performance, sexual performance in front of people under the age of 18 in costumes. Nothing good comes from that. It is not free speech. It falls on us in our movement, 40 state groups over, Jonathan, we have over 400 employees now, full-time equivalents, 60 million in infrastructure. And you know this, Jonathan, but we're the movement that does it backward, right? We don't get our ideas from Washington, D.C. and say, hey, how's this going to work in Laredo, Texas, or Austin? We say, this is what we need in East Texas, or it's working there in Lubbock or something like that. You bring it statewide, we pass it to other states and then toward the country. Give an example of what that's like working in that type of an environment with so many dynamic family policy councils right now.
Oh, it's fantastic, and we've had the blessing and the opportunity of be able to see how are things working in other states? How do things work in Iowa? How are things working in Florida? And being able to take from some of those best ideas as well. We just ended up passing a law this past legislative session, keeping sexual orientation and gender identity teachings out of our public schools here in Texas, kind of based upon the Florida law that went forth a couple years ago. So this is something that we bounce off of each other. We get those ideas, but it's really great to be able to say, this is what's working. Now let's spread it out to the rest of the country.
And we're only able to do that, folks, because of your support. You support me, you support Jonathan, you support, I told you, a team of over 400 people. More important than us, though, the 40 state organizations are more important than Family Policy Alliance, the national organization, but more important than the 40 state organizations, you guessed it, are the 50,000 churches that actually work. So if you're a church in Texas, we want you to go to Texas Values website. We want you to sign up. We want you to be involved in partnership with them. If you're an advocate or an activist, if you're an elected official, we want to be of service to you. We don't want to tell you what to do. We're not one of those ministries. We want to help you live out the values you already have in your heart that came from Jesus. And we hope that you'll use us as a resource to do that. That is exactly how we work. We work state to state. We work on these ideas. Tell everybody about our movement. We were not treated that well. You've been in the movement for a minute here. Jonathan Covey, the policy director. About 6 or 8 years ago, people said we were solutions looking for problems. When we talked about boys going in the girls' locker room, they said, that's not a big deal. It happens in a couple schools. The girls are okay with it. But it turns out we're playing a bigger role for God than we knew. Could you tell everybody about the reception we're receiving out there in Texas and around the country in the work that we do?
Craig, it's just a God thing because we started out down this road trying to say that this was wrong, protecting women in their privacy and their safe spaces, but also making sure that, you don't have biological men competing in biological women's sports. So many things like this. And, we we didn't get traction for a little bit of time, but then you just saw this. You started seeing what the activists and the organizations said wouldn't happen, which is that women started being outplaced. They started being having their trophies taken away. They started having their opportunities ripped away from them, and we saw just an outpouring of this issue becoming just real in the eyes of everyone across the country. And we saw Riley Gaines come to the forefront. Our organization was one of the first to utilize her to testify in front of the Texas state legislature and get that protection put in place for biological women in women's sports. We also, this past session, had the opportunity to be able to pass Senate Bill 8, which was our Women's Privacy in Private Spaces Act. And this is just a fantastic victory that we have worked on since 2014, I believe, trying to get that passed and make sure that women are protected in privacy and sex separated spaces, locker rooms, bathrooms, restrooms, all sorts of things. And this has a major impact on what we are seeing for folks being protected and being able to move forward. And it protects religious freedom as well, because you have a free exercise implication in that as well.
So, folks, we're grateful that you have listened to this podcast, but we want you to share it with other people. And here's why. It's not just for self-promotion. People are afraid. They don't think, because of all the programming of the mainstream media and all this stuff, they think that maybe they're against free speech or they're a book banner or something like that. You are not, folks. We have graduates serving in 43 state legislatures, 285 graduates, and we look for answers on how to protect both our Constitution and our right to free speech and to assemble and the free expression of religion. And to balance that out, folks, you've come to the right place. You've supported the right ministries. If you live in Texas, we want you to go check out Texas Values first, and then find your way to Family Policy Alliance. If you're in another state, there's a link below where you can find your state. You're good at math. Our audience is great at math. You know that 40 is not 50. So we have 10 states that we're looking to grow organizations in. The advantage you have if you join up with us is you get people like Jonathan Covey. You don't have to start at home plate and try to get to first base. Maybe you start at first base or second base. We can help you. We want you to check that out. We want to be ready for the 26 elections. So please come on in. The water's warm and join us. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. What is next for Senate Bill 12? Can we reasonably expect that the court is going to discharge this by, say, Easter?
I wish I could tell you on that. I do expect that we're going to be hearing early this next year some sort of oral arguments being set up for this law and to take a look at some of the substantive parts of the law. But I think it's a good signal that this has been sent back, because we're going to get, I think what you're seeing is we're going to see some constitutional analysis that varies very greatly from what we first saw, and it's going to be in our favor. So we're very excited about this. We do think it will be upheld, but we'll continue to watch and see how everything goes.
Big news, folks. This is why you put us on the field. We're winning everywhere right now. This is a win. Already it's a win because it overturned the laws. Now we're going to go for the validation of the policy in full. We can do that because you support us. Thank you for that. You are a blessing to us. Please keep us in your prayers and your thoughts. And to the extent that God and the Spirit put it into your heart, that you can support Texas Values, the Family Policy Councils and Family Policy Alliance movement. And we are ever so grateful. Until next week, blessings to you all.